Ja, so.
Now, this is how education of the future looks like, but this took place during the school holidays. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome 2 of the 3 winners and the team of TOSDR, or Tours in Terms of Service. No, join me on stage, Sebastian Mauer and Uwe Hohr. So these are the winners of the hackathon here in Berlin. TOSDR, the Chrome browser is a Google product, that's self-evident, but it's open, it can be extended. And you came up with one of these extensions, and it is called TOSDR, Terms of Service Didn't Read. So these are the people who didn't read the terms of service. That's correct. On the internet, you frequently have long texts that's then called too long, didn't read, and the same applies to the terms of service of all of the social networks. They're too long and nobody reads them anyway. And this extension that we came up with is a solution for that. Now, who of you has ever honestly read the terms of service on the internet and then clicked yes? Have you also understood them? Okay, so there's a big target audience for you here. Okay, now let's have a brief look at this extension. Okay. Well, okay, what's that? This is paper. I'm not familiar with paper. Okay, so here you see the regular Chrome browser open in this window, and my extension does the following. When I access a website, a social network, I get the respective information on this site and a context on how to define this page, how the data that I'm entering is used. So it's a translation of the terms of service into easy to understand German. It looks like this. Now, this is all in English, that everybody in Germany here can understand it. And we can see the simple bullet points here explaining what could happen with the data on this site. This is based on a crowdsourcing platform called Terms of Service Didn't Read, and Hugo will explain it a little bit more in detail. The extension only shows the data. What's more interesting is where the data comes from. So, Hugo.
Where does this data come from? This comes from this project. Oops. All right. So thank you for showing this very useful extension. Yeah, so we wanted to fix what we call the biggest lie on the web, because a lot of people click that they have read and agree to the terms of service when they don't. And the problem is that almost nobody has the ability or the time to read those terms, because they are very long. It has been researched that it would take 76 days every year for every individual to read all the terms they agree to on the web. And the fact is, some of these terms are very long, like iTunes. It's 19,000 words, which is longer than Macbeth. So with this project, we hope we can bring more balance and more fairness in the relationship between users and web services. We want to restore the mutual understanding between users and services, because we think agreement involves understanding, conscious understanding. People should know what they sign up for instead of blindly accepting anything that's hidden behind the little checkbox. So what we do is we flag the most important issues, and we give a very simple rating to people so that they have an easy way into reading and understanding the terms. We here have an example of Class B, which is a good kind of service with terms which are quite fair, and Class E, which are not so nice. As you can see, TweetPic is a photo sharing website for Twitter, and as a photo sharing website, they claim to take your copyright on your pictures. So the project is, it's public and transparent. By that, we mean that all the information that you see on the screen, you can see behind the scene how we came to this decision. You can see all the discussions, you can see who said what, and you can have a link to the actual terms if you want to read for yourself and speak up about your opinion if you think we're wrong. And the process is all using open data and free software. And fairness, because we think some of these terms are unfair, and we think the rights that are being dealt with in those terms are very important. Copyright is a very important right. What happens with your personal data is also very important. So we want also to engage in dialogue between users and services so that we can have some pressure or dialogue to have them adopt better terms and better practices. So yeah, this is the kind of questions that we hope we are able to give answers to, such as what kind of copyright license you gave to those services. Is it limited in any way? What's the public benefit? Because we think a lot of people would like to share pictures and to expand the commons, the public domain. Personal data. What happens with the data that is being collected? How third parties get access to it? And legal rights in general, such as how are they going to be able to change the terms, because this is one of the major practical issues. These terms change all the time and nobody can keep track of them. Thank you.
Terms of service didn't read. Demnächst.
Terms of service didn't read, soon to be found on the Chrome shop. And now I'd like to introduce Manuel to you. Manuel also developed an extension and wrote an extension. It's the Privacy Manager. What is this about?
Listen to switch to the place where is the extension. Okay, so let me before describe the idea of the extension. So users when use Chrome browser and they use to navigate through all settings to find out which privacy settings they need to switch off or switch on. So that's why I decided to create an extension that will give all that settings into their hand through the first glance, and they can easily find out information about each privacy setting that Chrome has, and also switch on or switch off that privacy setting in the Chrome using this pop-up window. So there's also explanation for each privacy settings. So people, if they even get through the settings in the Chrome, they don't get good description of each element. So there's all privacy settings that's provided by Privacy API by Google Chrome extension. And also here is another part of the extension where people can manage which kind of data they want to delete. For example, like cookies, like cache, and etc. There's also explanation of for each part of, for example, what is cookies, what is history. So, and also people have access to the incognito mode for the active tab page. So if they're navigating to the some page and they want to open it in the incognito mode, they can do it by clicking on this button. Also, there is other tabs, which is, for example, helps people to manage the cookie data. For example, they can choose, see what cookies are set for the current domain, or just check for all of the cookies and delete if they want. And also some network traffic management which helps people. So if they will turn on the collect headers, they can see every traffic, what's happening when they are opening the web page, and they can see what third-party pages opened, etc. Also, they can block the user agent. But the main part is this privacy part, which helps people to more deeply understand the privacy and to easy manage them.
Manuel Saroyan, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Has Stefan Roth arrived? Stefan Roth, are you here? Please join us on stage. What is happening with the winners now? Two of them couldn't be present here today. I was told that they have previous engagements today. But what's happening with these inventions now? Now, this is the second part of winning the hackathon. The first part was a visit to Munich, as you already heard during the video clip. Together with the Chrome team, they really fine-tuned and improved these extensions. And what could happen now is in Chrome, there's a so-called web store. Everybody can purchase the extensions that were uploaded by free developers. They can install it, can look at screenshots, and then make the decision whether they want to buy it or not. And Manuel's extension.
So, wenn Sie also jetzt nach Hause gehen und Ihren Chrome.
So when you go home and turn on your Chrome browser, you could immediately try out this extension. And I think Sebastian is also working on getting his extension on the Chrome store. It's just the way it is. You need to fine-tune it because you're never 100% satisfied. And then you can purchase these features. So is this a possibility for you to also do some recruitment, i.e. Train your future programmers in a way? Well, let's put it that way. Google is always welcoming talents, but this was not the main task here. It's always interesting to bring together a group of people with a certain objective and then see how they're solving the problems and what ideas they have. But if they stick to it, there might be possibilities, yes. Now you can ask the guys some questions on their ideas and maybe some ideas what's still missing, or you have an idea of how their extensions could be improved. Are there spontaneous reactions? You're all still going to school, right? Okay, so you're a little older. You're not going to school anymore. I was told, though, that you have not yet completed your vocational training. What do you do? I study computer sciences in Aachen. I also go to university. Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought this was a very impressive example for how grassroots approaches can also be used in order to improve data protection on the Internet. So give a big round of applause to the students. Thank you.
Now, if we're discussing data privacy, Mr. Schneider, are we not deluding ourselves to a certain extent if we say, okay, it's possible to regulate this in the first place? Are we not living in a time in which there's no point in having such regulation, where you can say, well, people look after themselves? Well, of course, we have to have more media literacy, and of course, you need certain rules and regulations to that end, to which companies and organizations must adhere. In particular, we're talking about data security in the Internet. People need to know what data they reveal about themselves or where these data end up. In other words, I have to find out about things myself in the first place. I must have the opportunity to know where the information ends up. And then I need the skills to be able to handle things in an appropriate manner. The question of, I put a question to a data protection officer. I often have the feeling that media literacy must be inculcated at school. Children have to be taught there. But looking at these young men here this afternoon, I think, well, they don't really need that, do they? They know their way around themselves. They probably have more knowledge and skills than their teachers have. Does it make much sense then to insist that young people must have a greater degree of media literacy? Well, that's quite correct. Of course, it's not the whole answer. a large number of young people have a knowledge lead as compared to their teachers. We say we're going to pass this on to the responsibility of the users would be falling short of the mark. Now, as a data protection officer, I'm concerned to make sure not only is knowledge passed on, but values are concentrated on it as well. Media literacy does not just mean being able to handle the technology. It's not just data privacy. In other words, knowing what the settings are. So the question is how things can be put into practice. But of course, this also involves an appreciation of the way things hang together. If I'm using a search engine, what does an algorithm mean? How does it come about? What sense of appreciation is there amongst the users? What am I being presented with? What's behind the scenes? This is more than just knowledge. It's a question of an appreciation of contexts, of values, and so on. So education, training, the tasks that schools have to do, and what the education people have to do is quite considerable. And Mr. Stobbe, do you have the impression that this is what is going already, or where do you see an inadequacy? So we're talking about providing young people with media literacy. Well, there's not one single truth here. On the one hand, we have the situation that there is a whole host of initiatives, irrespective of talking about companies, private individuals at the federal state level or the national government level who are engaged in the issue of media literacy. At the same time, we establish that amongst the users, there's not a great deal actually hits home. So if you like, we are in a situation that we need to reconcile various needs and requirements. So looking at the extension we've just been shown there on the charts, you could say, okay, if I were to load those on my browser, I could probably handle that, being a bit cautious there. Now, of course, these are things that are designed for people who know their way around quite considerably. So that's an alleviation. They can make the relevant settings. Now, if we're talking about people who don't use the internet a great deal, there'll be surely many among them who have no idea what it's all about. So therefore, what we definitely need to come to the crunch of the issue is to have a pooling of media literacy institution facilities who can put these things across. We must provide a facility for those who have questions to which they can put their questions. And then we need to have people who can come up with the relevant answers to the relevant questions. That is the way to the future. There was a bundling, a bringing together the individual providers of media literacy. Sabine Frank, if we're talking about Google, we often hear neat answers from heads of Google. For instance, Erich Schmidt, who once said, well, it's no problem. Of course, if young people use Google and reveal everything about themselves, if they reach age of maturity and they change their names, then all the sins of their youth are long gone and forgotten. Wasn't meant quite seriously, of course. What does Google actually do? What's the path to empowerment? How can you make sure that people are aware of the options that are open to them? It's good, of course, for young people to address this issue, but not to the majority of young people. So how can we get out to reach out to those people who don't have the opportunity necessarily? How can we raise their level of awareness? Well, I try to put my finger on the key issue. The question is complicated, and there is a multi-layered response to that question. We begin with our products. I refer to the example of Google Plus. Awareness raising begins with a product. We home in on this, and we are there when the individual question arises of the raising of people's awareness. That's the one aspect. The second thing is we need broad-based public interest. Now, I refer to the campaign that we've launched earlier on. Together with our cooperation partners, we've tried using various media to address this issue, to bring it home to people. and we deliberately engage in different forms of cooperation. Of course, online, that's no problem. But we also engage in cooperation with prominent partners, the Youth Protection Center, ClickSafe, FSM, many other partners we have on board at the moment, because it's only by means of such multiplier effects that we can reach out to sufficient people. The third I'd like to mention is the schools, where I think we have a good job to do. It's very difficult to get into the curricula, if you like. Now we'll be choosing a different option here. In other words, together with partners and others, try and develop project weeks providing materials for teachers. It's going to make it easier for teachers to give thought to this matter. Not to have a visit to the zoo as part of a project week, but to look at the very important issue of the media as such. In other words, to what extent media impact on our democracy. That's something that we should not forget when looking at all this issue. This is a very imminent value of our free society, the way that we deal with each other. So there's a whole range of answers that needs to be provided here. So Google partnership with schools here. Mr. Schneider, remember a couple of years ago there was a brochure that was issued by the Bavarian Ministry of Cultural Affairs and had the heading "Burnt the Blogger," something like that. And this was a comic. And I think it was a comic strip lion who explained things. So he said, you can't trust the sources in the internet. Burnt the blogger was at threat, and he thought it's only the daily newspaper that tells you the truth. Now, if you turn the brochure around, you see a counterfeit of the German Association of Publishers. So is this a way in which media literacy can be taken into schools? And should you not say, well, the next brochure of this kind is going to be published by Google? Well, as a former politician, I would not like to say that everything that's written in the papers is true. No, we have a cooperation that we've launched in Bavaria under the heading of media leadership. So when I was Minister of Cultural Affairs at that time, this was something that was incorporated in all the school curricula, but that's basically what you normally didn't have time for. So it's not relevant to any exams, for instance. You don't get any points or marks for becoming media literate, so it's perhaps not of that much interest. So based on that, we said, all right, okay, let us try and identify what children need in terms of media literacy at what particular age, and in the third, fourth, fifth form, whatever. And then we build the relevant modules which address certain issues in the course of 3 or 4 school periods, not to overstretch the teaching staff. I say there's a great deal of preparation that is needed here. No, it's dosed accordingly. Now, there was cooperation to this end with the Association of German Publishers, because we said, we cannot have media literacy and ignore the companies. Therefore, modules that were developed in conjunction with the German Publishers Association. We have other forms of cooperation with other partners. So I will not exclude the possibility of Google becoming such a partner. I'm no longer Minister of Cultural Affairs, but there is the body that's responsible for development of content. I invite you because we need the content. We should not be of the opinion that we can do this as officers in a ministry somewhere. We don't know what the state of the art is, what the relevant issues are. They should not lead to a situation in which Google says, okay, this is the way things are going to be conducted. No, we need to have access to information. We need to engage in cooperation. We need to have different forms of partnership. Very much in favor of that. Mr. Bors, as a data protection officer, you, of course, will listen very closely if Google comes up with a new form of application, face recognition or whatever. Now, in recent years, we have seen that there was a great outcry, for instance, if Street View cars chugged their way around the streets of the country, and a year later, Microsoft comes up with the exactly same approach, and Apple's flying over our heads in aircraft and so on, and recording everything. But this is no longer an issue. Is it in keeping with the times still to draw a red line, or is this not something where the companies are a step ahead of us and we just toe the line a little later on because we got accustomed to things and don't get upset anymore? So how do you handle these changing value patterns over the course of time in connection with the issue of media literacy? Well, the example you just given makes it clear that the understanding of what is private changes over the course of time. Back in the 1980s and 90s, initiated by television, there were tremendous movements in favor of emancipation. Now you've got the internet, which of course reinforces that. Now what is quite clear is that what the lawmakers lay down is always a bit behind the developments. We'll be hearing a presentation later on about things at the European level. This needs to be technology neutral. We cannot come up with a whole set of regulations for each new technological development. Not Google Street View to geodata need to comply with certain rules and regulations. This applies, of course, to social networks for various portals on customers with chip cards and so on and so forth. And what becomes quite clear is it's not just a question of media literacy here. This will not be possible just on the basis of pre-settings that are favorable to privacy. Privacy by default, as it were. No, there must be a framework set in the context of which things can be held in a democratic manner by the sovereign power, by the parliaments, which brings, of course, to the constitution and fundamental democratic rights. Now, if I look at things from the point of view of media literacy, then I'm pretty much of an opinion with Mr. Schneider, in light of examples that were just illustrated. We have a great deal of content in Saxony-Anhalt. We have a network skills platform, participants from companies, from the realm of business. This is offered in the schools for participants there. But when it comes to the binding aspect of things, sustainability, we cannot avoid a situation in which there are obligatory modules contained in the curriculum, not as optional compulsory subjects, but that the content is of relevance. And ultimately, of course, the teachers must be properly trained to this end as well. The Standing Conference of Ministers of Education and Cultural Affairs got together in May of this year, and after 1995, they said it was necessary to have a statement made about media literacy in schools, and these requirements are contained. Curriculum modules and training of the teachers. This will enable everybody else to come in and become involved. There could be different forms of cooperation developed. This is what's happening across the board in Germany. All sorts of good examples in this respect. Now, what I'm thinking here of not just the breadth, but also the depth of the issue as well, to make sure that things are binding and sustainable at longer term. Mr. Schrober, who's going to control things at the end of the line? We have all sorts of data protection officers, not just in Germany, at European level too. Things are getting fuzzy at the edges, of course, all sorts of different people involved, debates of all kinds, raging back and forth. Who's going to pull things, put things together, integrate things to make sure that you can say this is a reliable guideline for us to use? Well, that's something that we're becoming involved in as the Federal Ministry, because the Standing Conference of Ministers of Cultural and Educational Affairs are responsible here. We have to distinguish here between who's responsible at what level, the federal government level, federal state level. As regards youth protection, there's the federal government that's responsible for federal youth protection. Officers are becoming involved here. We have to make sure there's not too much overlapping. That's why we're moving down this path in a very proactive manner as the ministry. What we're trying to do is to launch various kinds of initiatives to make sure that the appropriate things can be brought together and to call on people to become involved. Now, there was one aspect of Google that's been involved, going online, for instance. This is a federal initiative that I'm talking about in order to spread software and have that made available. That's the one thing. The other thing is that we have Internet to Kids Protection. That's an initiative that we launched where we try to bring things together, pool and bundle them. And these are, of course, also all starting points that have been made. to try and address all sorts of different issues, but to integrate them. So overall, of course, and here again, that's why I'd like to bring this additional point here, with a focus on schools. I'm very pleased that nobody said we need internet as a school subject. But ultimately, what we need to do is to have a development of media literacy for children and young people. And we need to have educational skills in this respect. This applies, of course, to teachers and trainers, but of course also of parents, whom we cannot afford to ignore either. Particularly, we're talking about the risks that young people are exposed to. This is what needs to be done at home as well, not just in school. The parents and guardians are called upon here to exert their influence. And the third thing is, and I will go along with you here, that you need the appropriate legislative framework within which to operate. And this can be carried out by use protection legislation or by the relevant treaties amongst the federal states. Then you've got a three-way process in which things can come into play. Well, let me just add one additional aspect to it. We've talked about more media literacy for young people, more media literacy for teachers as well and educators. Ms. Franco, what about the media literacy of politicians? Well, as in the population at large, mixed bag. There are people who have a great deal of media literacy, and there are other people who, well, based on the discussions we've had, have a need to improve. You can't give an across-the-board answer to this. Well, are you not worried occasionally about people having times laid down for internet use? Well, it's a very broad-based discussion we're engaged in. I've been involved for a long, long time here in this respect, so it sounds a bit absurd, but as a result of a lack of alternatives at one time in the past, there were no alternative for people to comply with legal regulations. But there was this call for a statutory framework, but this will be organized in such a way that it makes sensible use possible. And this brings us back to the issue of media literacy. Unfortunately, we established every then that the technical developments are not aware to everybody, and therefore there are rules and regulations that are inimical to technological development. We can have a long-term discussion about this, of course, but the fact of the matter is that we will always need this statutory framework, but it's been in place for some time. Anyway, the question is, what are the technical details going to be like to make sure that it's going to be possible for technological innovations to come along? That's what the users want, of course. That's why we're talking about this issue here now. We want to provide excellent service for the users. We want to empower them to use these services in a sovereign manner. That, again, is an issue we need to address. How we are going to succeed in putting it into practice. Now, I've already indicated to you what our response to that is. Now, I like to hear that overall the impression is that you need cooperation. I will certainly go along with it. Mr. Schneider, we're glad to take up your offer is there. We have no intention whatsoever to exert any kind of editorial influence. The examples that you referred to, I think, is a deterrence example, where that thing should not run. The question is, how can we use ANA, the way that technology it operates, how can it be used for other people, and how this can be made neutral use of. I think this should not be created that there is a company that's trying to market products that's not what we want. For us, it's a question of demonstrating sovereignty. Anybody like to put a question from the audience? Questions to data protection officers, how media literacy can be increased, where you've established weak points, or what about your children? What's your response in the private context? It's very well and good to say nice things when you're up here on the stage, but what about at home? How do you solve the problem at home with your kids? Well, I have resolved the problem myself. In the meantime, my kids have got to an age where the question is no longer put to me, but it's vice versa. So my daughter is 21, the other daughter is 24, and this means that problem has now been resolved. But of course, this is a question of development. A number of years ago, she had a computer, there was no internet connection. Then we started setting up a network, and the question was, okay, what's she going to be looking at on the net? So the consequence for me was, of course, it's important to know exactly, not of course right down to every detail, but in principle, what the approach to the use of the internet is and what's actually going on in there. You talk about these things and you demonstrate interest as a parent vis-a-vis your children, and to keep things open. This is the basis for a dialogue, which of course at some stage is turned around, because I spend several hours a day in a building, therefore not in a position to know what's going on all the time. And of course the upshot of that is that certain functions and opportunities were demonstrated to me by my daughter. So it's an exchange basis that comes into play, of course, but it's something you got to be aware of at the outset. That's one of my propositions that I'd like to voice here. In the digital area, you have to apply what happens in the offline sector as well. So if there is cohesion in the family, people talk to each other, then things will work out. And the values that we have in the offline sector, if they are in place too in the digital sector as well, then you get on fine. But in the face of all these discussions, I think there are certain things that need to be taken into account. Of course, you should come up with strong penal measures at the outset. If you start criticizing Street View, then it is, of course, intervention in people's personal freedom. And once Street View has been carried out at the same time, there's intervention in the freedom of property owners. Both examples are exaggerated. You can say, okay, you've got to look and see what the terms and conditions are like. That's the one thing that annoys me about discussion in respect of the internet, that the criteria is set at a very high level. And then there's one other point I'd like to refer to, of course, in this discussion too, we now find ourselves in a situation where we're talking about great of influence, business interests, money, and so on and so forth. So if we're talking about internet publishers, publishers' organizations, internet, TV, what the relationship between these three groups of people. Of course, we're talking about battles here for market shares, influence, ad blocks, and so on and so forth. And in this interrelationship, of course, this is the task of the politicians. Of course, it's up to us as well to say, okay, you can argue amongst yourselves. At some stage, you're going to have to put rules in place so things continue to function. But please do not forget that those who are to use what it is you're providing, they should not be left out of account. They must have a right to have a say as well. So the focus then is on the user. And if that remains the case in the future, well, we'll be delighted. Anybody else like to put a question from the audience? Do you have children? How do you handle that issue in particular? I looked over my daughter's shoulder just a short time ago, and I was surprised. She was on Facebook, and there was this abbreviation POS. And what does POS mean? And I Googled this afterwards, and in young people's language, it means parent over shoulder. So these are sort of these little warnings that you have. Okay, this means I'm old. I mean, Schneider, just picturing you playing World of Warcraft with your kids. No, didn't play that with them. My youngest daughter is also 24, so I'm out of that in the meantime. There are two key terms involved here: openness and transparency. Openness, in other words, you talk about children of an appropriate age, but you need to be open enough to look in the other direction as well. There are certain phases when looking over the children's shoulders means that the children turn away and block things off. So they need to get away out of the analog relationship with the parents into the virtual world of friendship with their friends. So you need data protection vis-a-vis them. Well, openness has to do with trust, of course, that is part and parcel of the upbringing process. It doesn't begin on the internet. It begins very much earlier, how you use pocket money and so on. So you need to build up trust vis-a-vis your children. You have to demonstrate that as parents. You need that. And this question, too, of the use of the internet. Of course, they surf at times when I'm not looking over their shoulder. Of course, the point is not for them to switch content when they know I'm looking over their shoulder, look at different sites. No, as part of their normal behavior, they should be aware of the values that it involves and decide things for themselves. So that's the aspect of openness that you need to bear in mind. Looking to the companies, there's the need for transparency to prevail. Now, as regards use protection, I think we do have this good model. It may sound a combinated regulation, a self-regulation, where you have the responsibility called for on the part of the companies. Well, it sounds like a flexi quota. Well, that's developed over a period of 10 years, and I think that neither the companies nor the youth protection officers want to get back to that sort of stage, because things have moved on from there. This involves a certain aspect of trust, of course, but also involves commitment on the part of the company as well, not to do everything that is technologically feasible, and not always to go to the limits of what is legally feasible. Not to infringe taboos, to try and see how far you can get. I think we could have a discussion site about this. That would be good. We need a framework, but you need flexibility within that framework. However, I must also insist that there is not abuse made of that framework as put in place. And if there are infringements, then you must be able to bring out the penal measures and impose those. Well, I hope Mr. Bors is saying doing the one without ignoring the other. Yes, at the present moment, having an intensive discussion here in Germany about the issue of self-regulation in social networks. That was a lengthy discussion with the geo data services, what the ultimate solution is going to be, Google Street View and other models of this kind. And you have to bear in mind that there's a service, and these data can be connected with other services as well. So I try to take a holistic look at things. And when we come on now to the social networks, Facebook and co., but I suppose Facebook is the most important partner here, because self-regulation doesn't function there at all. The federal minister is banking very much on self-regulation, but my opinion is that we do, in fact, need red lines put in place on the part of the legislator. There have been a number of good approaches amongst the federal government in this respect, which has been forgotten to a certain extent. There's a conference taking place in Berlin tomorrow with data protection officers about such issues. How is this to apply across the board in Europe? Perhaps can be regulated on a standardized basis on a foundation of a Charter of European Basic Rights, which applies everywhere with respect to the USA and the providers operating from there. So I think the principle of self-regulation is a good principle. I think also attaches great importance to self-control as well. The data protection should be organized properly, of course, within the authorities themselves as well. Companies are called upon to think of data protection management as well at the management level, at the board level, of course. These are the levels at which things must operate, but we shouldn't just bank solely on self-regulation, not just solely on media literacy, on the relationship between users and providers. No, what we also need are the relevant foundations and frameworks, legal frameworks, and here the parliaments are called upon to make their contribution. Of course, we also need data protection on a technological basis. What we need to have is an appropriate mix of all these factors when it comes to the issue of what should be authorized in legal terms or not. In other words, profiling, using all the data that are available. Where are the limits here in this field? That, again, is an important issue where the European legislature is coming into play. Perhaps I can mention one point by way of illustration here. In the discussion we've just had about young people, we need to draw attention to the fact that there is a considerable degree of differentiation. We're talking about young people active surfing the net. Then we're talking about young people starting at the age of 3 and upwards, up to the age of 27 and 18, of course. You reach the age of majority. Different rules come into play. So what we need here is a protected area for children up to the age of 18. Of course, kids vary in their development. And then we need media literacy in other respects as well. We need protected areas for the one group, and for others, the development of skills and literacy to be able to handle things properly, which brings us on to the point ultimately where children say, okay, that's of no interest to you. It's none of your business. What I do with my pocket money is my business. I'm going to buy what I want, and you just keep out of it, Dad. That's none of your business. And that's Sabine Frank. Closing word from you. Well, there are so many buzzwords. We've only a limited amount of time, but nevertheless, I'd like to come back to a few of them, if I may. Data security by technological means, I think very important. You've addressed that. We'll have an opportunity in the following panel discussion to have an exchange on that issue. It's very important for us to make progress with data security. We know from many surveys that this is the key issue from the user's point of view, the safety, security of their data. We're investing a great deal in this field. Now, you have also referred to self-regulation, positive experience gained in youth protection. Can we make further progress on that road? I think you need to bear in mind that the legal conditions vary. In youth protection legislation, it's a very sophisticated system of self-regulation, where self-control plays a role, where you can make decisions, where companies have certain advantages if they engage in voluntary control. That's something that we do not have in the realm of data security. So a completely different point of departure. We have clear-cut things that are laid down. We have very room for maneuver for self-regulation. Now I can assure you that there are very intense discussions together with FSM about the self-regulation projects that you have referred to, but it's no less complex by dint of the fact we have new data protection regulations coming from the EU level. Of course, will have to be transposed into national legislation as well. Nevertheless, we're very prepared to play a constructive role engaging in exchange with our competitors together with the FSM. Third issue of media literacy is one I'd like to address as well and reinforce what you have said yourself, State Secretary. But we need different responses to that. That's also our opinion, beginning with safe areas. We need to bring in NGOs here. We need the appropriate forms of surfing for children so that they can have an appropriate access to the internet and move on from there to other educational means and technology. And as referred earlier on to our own products. I'm very pleased to engage in cooperation with all of you here on the panel. So let me pass the floor back to you. Well, I think we completely overstretched our time, so if there are no questions, ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest we take our next coffee break and we'll get back again in 15